Hi everyone, I hope you're keeping fairly well. It's the Black Shadow here. It's been a fairly busy week as I'm prepping to get ready for a house move in the middle of next week, just a few days away now. Before I do, I want to put together one more video for the channel proper, giving my thoughts on a lot of the conversation going on regarding possible changes to the leader picking systems that we're using for Dune Imperium. Just a heads up on more generally, before we get into that, we are getting into the finals now for the War of Life Open, the Tsar Memorial Tournament. I believe the first game of that has been uploaded on Sir Cheeseballs' channel. The second game of that to be played very, very soon. On top of that, I will also be doing a stream this Sunday as well on this channel. Should be pretty much the last thing I'll be doing, because after that, I'm basically just boxing and prepping for the move. So hopefully it happens pretty smooth and we get settled down fairly quickly so we can return to content very soon, because of course there's some tournaments coming up that I think people are going to be interested in. So with the reintroduction of a rank system that's been brought back to the community and a fair few folks partaking, we're now gathering more sort of information data, obviously just generally speaking, as well as more familiarity with Immortality and how it interacts with Savfk, as well as obviously the general base game. We've also seen shifts as well with kind of how players approach the game as well, but obviously a much more of a heavy focus on getting Swordmaster, though shipping obviously still exceptionally strong with any Savfk expansion that's going to exist. Well, a question that's come up quite a few times in conversation, even on my some of the streams and bits and pieces I've done, is regarding any possible changes to the drafting system that we use for leaders. It's been a complicated question that's had a few different answers as we've gone along, and now there is some wonders whether Hidden Picks definitely did a purpose with the Rise of Ix, but now with Immortality kind of changing the way the game's played. Is there perhaps a better way to do drafting? And also with ranked sort of hovering around as well, is there a fairer system that could be implemented into how we choose leaders and sort of getting around to the start of the game? I'm going to go into my thoughts regarding where I think we're at and what I think maybe could or could not happen. But first thing first, I want to just give you guys a bit of a brief intro into like how we've even gotten to this stage as well. Some of you, I know quite a few folks watching this are fairly new to the community or even just picking up the game and might not even understand why we use the Hidden Picks format and why we have that at all. So here's a little introduction, kind of a brief history of how we've come across from the start of this game coming out. If you don't want to listen to it, feel free to skip ahead, but you might find it interesting. So our journey begins all the way back in 2020, which admittedly is not a year that we all heavily want to remember, but it did, amongst many other things, feature the initial release for Dune Imperium by Mr. Paul Dennen and Dire Wolf. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I want to have a quick look at the original manual, which of course one of the first things you'd always look at when you get hold of a new board game here. So your little intro here, you've got a little bit of a cover of like what you're generally be doing, a little overview here, your game components. But then what we're looking at here is the setup page, and particularly what we're going to look at is section D, because you've got just general setup here, creating your conflict deck, shuffling your various cards, but section D covers how you choose leaders in the game, the actual people you're going to be playing as for the course of your game, and it's surprisingly bare bones. Specifically, it says, each player takes a leader and places it in front of them. And that's it. That's it! Now, while the actual breadth of different board games that I've played is not quite as wide as you might expect, this is definitely the first one that I'd ever played where, for choosing the person you'd be playing as, there's basically no information, and you're just kind of left to sort it out yourselves. Every other game I've played has at least had some kind of loose general suggestion or guideline or structure or anything to kind of hit. This literally says, here's 8 leaders, sort it out. Which is very, very curious. I remember actually contacting Paul Dennen about this, one of the few things I chatted about over the course of time, and asked him basically why he kind of didn't really give any information, just let players sort it out. And I think the response was something along the lines of basically just kind of giving a bit of player agency, that a group of people playing the game will determine for themselves how best to sort out their leader drafting. And kind of giving a bit of license to them, which I think is definitely a noble goal, and I don't hate that at all. But the problem is that when you get from that to dozens, hundreds, thousands of different people playing the same game in the same sort of area, that you need something to go with to get some kind of normality and a bit of uniform kind of method to how you're choosing it, so that you're not kind of darting about and playing all these different kinds of drafting methods, which is kind of where we got to with here on the TTS Club, with deciding that we need to have something in place, as much as it's obviously nice to have a bit of licensing freedom, how do you want to sort it out, ultimately there is an advantage to just having a little bit of structure involved. So with no obvious direction of how to set things up, and a need for some degree of standardization, we basically had our own opportunity to basically create our own draft system, more or less however we wanted. And the really cool thing about doing something like this, when you have so much freedom, is that not only obviously having that uniformity does help, so you're playing against different people, but the general rule set is still going to be the same in how you operate, which obviously helps just keep things fairly level and consistent between matches. But drafting leaders is the first thing you ever do in the game, and as such, it's the first opportunity for you to kind of affect how the game's going to go. And if you tweak how you do that, you can actually make very subtle but fairly important changes to the game and any perceived balances, or more specifically, imbalances that a game might occur. Now, every game in the world, it has some kind of imbalance somewhere, because you're having to take turns. Even chess at its most fundamental level, ultimately, white has an advantage because it goes first. They're not playing at the exact same time, and every game is exactly the same. So you have to have some kind of opportunity when you make your own system to, if you think there's an overall consensus on something isn't quite right and either needs like an improvement or not, then you can mess around with this and kind of encourage certain either positions or types of leaders to be a little bit more on parity with others around them. So how do you go about creating a fair and balanced picking system? Well, you kind of go through the permutations and you kind of assess to see what seems to work and what doesn't. So if you just said, well, let's just pick leaders in our general turn order, so player one is first, so they'll go pick Lido, and people just kind of pick their leaders as they go here. Well, what obvious problems do you have? Well, not only is player one getting first choice of all 8 leaders that are available, but also gets first choice on the board as well. And when you're trying to build an economy, that is gotta be an advantage. And we've seen as well from various other games. And that's one thing you got, there's so many games out there you can look to see sort of things they've done and what works and what doesn't. That it's pretty obvious that here, if he's getting first pick of leader as well as on the board as well, that's gonna be an advantage for somewhere. And not only is it an advantage for player one, it's definitely a disadvantage for player 4, who's having to pick the last of what's left, assuming the better leaders get picked first, and also has to go with the not so good positions on the board. So that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So if the perception is that the player in 4th position is being disadvantaged not only on board but also leader selection, well, you can't really do a lot about positions on the board because someone has to act last, but you can definitely do something about the leaders. So this is where the reverse drafting became, the reverse open draft that used not only for the base game, but was also used for our first couple of competitions with the Rise of X expansion, where player 4 would at least have the opportunity to pick leaders first. So while the reverse picking system seemed to be a step in the right direction, it did create both some advantages, but also some unusual disadvantages that started coming out as well. And a lot of this was also expedited by the fact that this was when the Rise of X expansion came out, and in particular, the introduction of interstellar shipping. The most powerful space in the game, it always was, and it's always basically will be. The amount of action compression you get to do here, everyone dives through it, because if you can dominate this, you get a massive advantage in regards to resources and just the amount of stuff you'll do on the board in a game where you don't get a lot of actions if you think about it over the course of the whole game. So, if 4th place is perceived to be at a disadvantage, because now that interstellar shipping existed, especially, the issue you had was everyone was hitting full space. So round 1, red goes there. Then round 2, green goes there. And the issue is that it meant that player 4, whoever it was going to find it very hard to get any kind of shipping done, because they're always getting beaten to fold space, unless they can find some way to find bumps otherwise, be it with memo quarters, which someone's probably going to get ahead of you anyways, be it with random bumps in combat, which is something you could target, but it's far from predictable. 4th place was seemingly going to be struggling there. So let's give them the choice of having at least first picker leaders. It was the best we could do. And now it's great. We've got 14 different leaders to pick from. Awesome. So, you know, depending on what your Imperium row looks out, depending on how everything seems to be looking good and going, there's, you know, everything looks not too bad. And at least it's an advantage we can incur to them. But the problem is that it creates some bizarre dynamics. So, for example, let's take a good example here. And this is a fairly classic thing to happen. Let's say we've got a row like this, for example. It's okay. It's not too bad. But specifically, there's one big card here in the shadows. Very strong, high desirable, lets you do loads of stuff, and there's that shipping influence we can pick up as well if we can get this going. So a way to try and cheat the queue a little bit, and maybe try and find a way to rush it into shipping sooner than you're meant to. Sounds great. So, I tell you what, we were so badly we want to get hold of that. Let's pick a leader that we can use to get hold of that leader specifically. Let's go for Armady Kaz. He's got conscription, which lets you, if you play your ring, you just acquire a card that costs 3 persuasion or less. Awesome for in the shadows. Great, let's go choose him. The problem is that, well, you picked Armady Kaz, but everyone knows you picked Armady Kaz. And of course, Armady Kaz is not the only leader that can pick up the cards on the Imperium Road. Another person that can do it is Helena, wherever she is in this list. There she is here. She has the Manipulate ability, which allows you to remove a card from the road. It's a little bit slower, but lets you pull it out of the road to acquire it at the end of the reveal. And the issue you had is that if player 4 picked Armady Kaz, well, what's to stop player 3 just taking Helena? And if she finds her ring, well, there's nothing Ekaz can do about it. He just gets cut out completely. And this sort of thing started happening is that 4th place started getting really concerned about trying to pick certain leaders because they were scared about getting counterpick. Another very common thing that started happening as well was regarding like fighting over Mentat, because Mentat's pretty strong. The card draw and the stalling, very, very effective, especially in the later game if you can get that. So, let's go and pick someone that seems to be pretty good. Lido, for example, 4th position, seems a really good shout. Not only can he look to try and get hold of the Mentat for a little bit cheaper, but obviously if he can pick up some spice, he can use the chase faction influence, looking to get hold and access to Instone without even having to go fold space as much, and get in, trying to get ahead of that queue. But of course, if you pick someone that needs to rely on Mentat a fair amount, and then the person to your right just says, well, I'm just going to pick a leader who really wants Mentat a lot and can get it really cheaply as well, then again, there's nothing playful can do it. They're just going to get cut out of the spot they're after almost every single round, and there's nothing they can do about it. And player 3 just gets to block player 4 for basically doing nothing. And this was a bit of an issue. The other issue that started occurring for player 4 as well is that while there was definitely a improvement in the situation of being able to pick first leader, the issue is because interstellar shipping even existed in the first place, that the advantage picking leaders didn't really outweigh just simply being able to get to here and get to here. Something we've been now understanding a lot more with Immortality, and has become a lot more apparent, is because, you know, in these Euro-style games, just simply having the ability to go to the same spot twice before anyone else can, and taking advantage, especially, you know, if you hit full space twice, you get interstellar shipping. And not only do you get interstellar shipping, no one else is getting interstellar shipping for a while, so you can absolutely dominate the spot for several rounds, build up a big advantage, and by the time when people start getting out there, you're already good and ready to go, then you're pressing the map, you're getting victory points, you're fighting alliances, and everyone's trying to, like, play catch-up here. And again, other leaders that could jump the queue for shipping were definitely advantageous. So, for example, Baron Harkonnen with his Master Stroke, being able to get those extra bumps. Tessia Vernis is the other good example of being able to shift her alliance around between factions, again, jumping those queues. And it just meant that while you could pick your leader in 4th position, the fact that everyone knew who you were picking meant that they would, whether they were intending to or not, just kind of subtly counterpick you. And as such, it just wasn't doing the effect that we required. 4th still felt pretty kind of bad, because they just couldn't get access to the really desirable locations at any particular time they wanted to, and they were very subject to the whims of the other players. And the last issue that became apparent, especially over the course of the original Imperium Cup, that was noted to me by a variety of people that are watching the content. We're enjoying the videos, enjoying the games, but we're getting a little bit annoyed and sick of the fact that the same leaders were getting picked pretty much every single game, and the meta kind of got kind of stale. Again, because of the abilities of the Baron Harkonnen and Tessia Vernis allowing them to just dominate shipping and build up massive advantages, is that they were getting picked competition-wise pretty much every single game. I don't think I really saw a proper tournament game ever where at least Tessia Vernius or the Baron didn't get picked, if they both didn't get picked. They were getting picked almost every game. The Beast was getting picked a vast amount of games. And what also ended up happening is because of all the counter-picking was going, is then Helena was getting picked massively commonly in the fourth position, because the idea being that at least she wouldn't get blocked, and that was her main defense. You know, not a great reason to be picking a leader just so you don't get blocked. And, you know, if I remember correctly from the Imperium Cup, I think about like 40 to 50% of games, player 4 was taking Helena, which, considering there are 14 different leaders, signified that there's something wrong here, and this needs to change. So a consensus forming that something needed to change the leader pick system. Of course, the question is, well, what, how, and why? Again, you look at the issues you've got. First off, you've got player 4 seems to be struggling, and again, mainly because instead of shipping, they just can't get there quickly enough. Everyone else is cutting in there first. They're losing access to a very valuable space there when it's so much stronger than pretty much anything else on the board. And you've got a rigidity of leader choices going, because pretty much all leaders that can find their way to instead of shipping quicker than others and take advantage of that situation. And so you need to address that. One thing that came up and was suggested, not only back then, but also a little bit at the moment right now, is leader banning. And the idea being that in some formats, however you want to do it, is that not only do leaders pick who they're going to play, but they also decide on a leader to remove from the overall pool. This could have been like everyone bans leader and then everyone chooses they're going to play, or you pick one and ban one, or however you want to do it. And in theory, it seemed a good idea to give players a lot of license in kind of how they want to control it, and kind of make a degree of like some strategy of who they pick and who they deny depending on the conditions they see. The problem is that with Rise of Ix, it had become fairly clear fairly quickly who was the best leaders, because instead of shipping, you know, this space here completely changed how the game plays. Back in the base game, before instead of shipping even existed, there wasn't even that much of a perception of fourth place being that much worse than the leaders, because, you know, you'd have players that would like make a die for Hardy Warriors or Steel Suits for Spice, to sell Melange to get Swordmaster sort of thing, but fourth never felt that much worse than all the rest of the positions, though it was probably not as good. But instead of shipping really exasperated that. So, leader banning. Well, I mean, let's do a little bit of a discussion then, shall we? So, if you were in charge of a game, let's say you were like, you know, all 4 of these players here, for example, or all you, for example, and you need to ban 4 of these, will you pick anyone? Well, who would you ban? And the problem was, the answer was kind of glaringly simple. And the issue you had is that you're just going to ban the best leaders. If I can't play them, you're not going to play them. So Tessia Vernius and Baron Harkonnen, who were shown to be kings of Rise of Ix, you can be pretty sure that in any kind of competitive game, they're just off the table. Every single time. Not only because both leaders are strong innately, but if one got played without the other, they could lead to crushing advantages on the table and just absolutely dominating the game. So pretty likely they're getting banned pretty much every single game. Beyond that, you're looking at leaders like the Beast, for example, who's always been really good. Those extra resources lets him have a lot more flexibility at the start, and his ring is always been super strong, so he's probably going. Duke Leader is also a good advantage. Again, if he's been picked to the back of the row, he can use his ring to chase, and again, steal access instead of shipping, sometimes without even going for it, just using his ring to pay for it. But again, maybe if there's a really good card on the road, like Liet Kynes, like Jessica back in Rise of Ix sort of thing, you know, either Helena or Ekaz getting banned. And the issue is that if you say some combination of those 6 leaders go, you're basically left with these leaders all the time. That's not a knock on these leaders, but the issue of what you end up happening, I think was becoming apparent, was that all you're doing is you're just removing the top 4 leaders on the ladder, and then you're just going to play the next 4 leaders down the ladder. And I think it was, the worry was that it's just, you're playing a game competitively, and you're going in knowing almost guaranteed that 2, if not 3 leaders are going to be banned pretty much every single game. Is that really the right way to go about it? It didn't seem apparent. I think ultimately, after a little bit of thought, it became kind of unpalatable, and so the idea was kind of dropped. It also, even if you're still doing this, is this still assisting player 4 particularly in getting access to shipping, and managing to overcome the difficulty? And, you know, again, you see with player 4, if you've still got this kind of weak set of leaders and such here, if I pick like Count Ilban in player 4, think, oh, okay, and dominate Mentat, well, player 3 can still go pull Atreides, and Paul can make good use Mentat, and you're still getting counterpicked. And so that gave birth to the hidden pick system, originally devised by Ozymandias, who looked to address both of these issues in a somewhat compromising sort of way, but one that, once it was getting played, definitely picked up traction as it went. It still retained the original premise of picking reverse order, which is really good, and I think is very important to any drafting system in any game, is that it needs to be fairly simple and not overly complicated. There are people that, ultimately, if you're sitting down to play a game of Dune Imperium, you don't want to be playing a game before you play Dune Imperium of, like, kind of guessing and whatever else and trying to pick people. Like, oh, if I pick them, do I pick them? And getting stuck on that. People just want to get down and play the game. So nice and simple, straight and easy, best thing for standardization. So it took the reverse system, but made two important tweaks. The first thing is to deal with the counter picking, is that leader choices would be done in secret. Once player 4 picks a leader, player 3 doesn't know who he's picked, so he can't counterpick player 4. Once player 3's made a choice, player 2 can't counterpick them because they don't know what they were going against. But in order to further give an advantage to player 4 and kind of protect that, because of course, if player 4 just picks a leader, well, player 3 can just look to see, well, who's missing. So that still doesn't really solve the issue, and you're still going to get the same leaders getting picked anyway, just people don't know who picked who in what order. So the big change was that out of the 14 leaders being picked out of the entire pool here, you took them all, you put them in a bag, you shuffled that bag, you took out 6 random leaders, was the number we eventually settled on, and you deleted them. Took them completely out immediately, which meant that not only did player 4 was the only person on the table who would be able to look and see which leaders are in the game, which aren't the only person with that perfect information, it then protected them, because it meant, for example, if player 4 takes Baron Harkonnen here, because there's no Tezzy Vernius, wants to try and keep that advantage, well, player 3 is going to look at the bag and is going to see this, and do you know who player 4 picked? I mean, Tezzy is missing, Baron's missing, it seems reasonable, but, there's a lot of comment leaders, all the shipping leaders, Hundro, Yuna are missing, stuff like that, so you can't really pick depending on who you think Blue's got, because they could pick 7 different people. You've no idea what they've chosen. And while it was maybe a little crude in the fact that it was obviously randomization, it meant that sometimes certain players still got kind of more favorable roles than others, which is going to happen, I think, in any draft system. Again, it was a step in the right direction and kind of trying to get some kind of more normalistic balance across all positions. The Hidden Picks format saw its first competitive play in the Golden Path Internationals competition, where I introduced it. It already gained a lot of traction being played in games on the side, and I thought the results have been definitely positive enough to introduce it into a more official setting. And from the feedback that I got from across the board, it was very well received as well. It helped freshen up games, not just from playing and sitting down, but especially from a viewer side as well, people watching these games, and just enjoying the fact you're seeing a lot more different leaders getting picked now, players having to go a little bit outside their comfort zone maybe, formulating different plans, being a little bit more reactive to the board, and just seeing things, you could watch 20 games different Dune Imperium and know that you're going to get a different experience every single time, because you're just never going to see the same leaders and different things are going to happen. So I think it was very well received. But then Immortality came out in November. And Immortality once again kind of shook things up, because what ended up happening was that although you still had, especially with Rise of Victor especially, a lot of our focus now is with Rise of Victor and Immortality together, and this shipping is always still as good as it is, it's not as much of a kingmaker as it used to be, because there are now other things that you can do, in particular the Talaxu track and the experimentation cards, improving the ability of going mining, getting hold of these, getting specimens to get these very powerful Talaxu cards in your deck. And as such, the focus has gone more from getting the most out of your actions to just having more action in the first place, because the deck quality has increased so much from the Rise of Victor expansion that now, instead of getting to instead of shipping and just getting the most out of one action, you're better off just getting smuggling twice, getting Swordmaster, and just having more actions and more chance to use these very, very powerful urgent boxes here and use that to form your advantage. Hence why we've kind of seen the Swordmaster meta that has now formed in recent time. Immortality's had 2 main effects, I think, on the game. First of all, and I still believe it, I do think the distance between the best leaders and the worst leaders has shrunk a little bit. It was very clear in pretty much majority of Rise of X games who the better teams were going to be before even a card had been shown on the board. You know, it was just fairly clear. But Immortality's changed it a lot now. You know, there's a lot more diversity going on in the game. There's a lot more going on just in general. And now different strategies are starting to be approached. You know, people might go for Steel Suits Research Station or to rush particularly powerful Talaxu cards. People, again, are rushing various other different methods. But because of the fact that this is occurring, and there's more and more path to victory, it maybe has reinforced the advantage that players 2 and 3 have over their counterparts on the other side of the table. And what started happening, and I've talked about this in recent videos, is now player 2 is seen to have an advantage because, again, they are always going to be the first person, almost always, to go to the same board space twice. And in a game like Dune Imperium, where if you smuggle twice, you go up and down and find a coin somewhere, you can get Swordmaster way before anyone else. Or if you go fold space twice and you answer the shipping, you're going to have an advantage. And player 3 can basically kind of take advantage of that as well. Player 1 can obviously hit fold space or smuggling, but it's very hard for them to get a second visit to there because once they've done there once, players like, oh no, we can't let them get there again. So, you know, player 3 will block them and then player 4 will block them. And one's just kind of sit there hanging out a little bit here. So the situation now is a little different from what it used to be before. Whereas previously, it was more just the case of certain leaders are just way stronger than everyone else and getting picked every game. Now you have a situation where the perception is that positions 2 and definitely position 2 and probably position 3 to some degree as well has an advantage over the rest of the table. And of course, it doesn't matter what leader drafting system you incorporate, the player 2 is just going to be player 2, and that's where it goes. They're going to get first access to these spaces here, and there's nothing that player 1 or anyone can really do about it unless they get some weird hand draw. So, again, the question gets asked, if there needs to be a tweak, what tweak do you implement? Now, should be noted, I've used the word perception there, and I use that because we don't really know quite where things stand. Everything, the basis of opinions that we've formed as a community are based from what we've seen, anecdotal evidence from multiple people. I'm not going to dismiss that, but we don't have a ton of actual hard data to go with it. Obviously, we've been collecting information on games being over the course of the tournament and rank games, for example. The problem is that a lot of that data isn't actually particularly usable. An error crept up into the database a little while ago, which I was the first one to notice, actually, and I let Cheese will know about it. And basically what happening is that the data positioning for who was being registered as first player depending on the marker just corrupted completely. And as such, what was happening was that, say, first player marker was here and was the first player in the game, but when the results were getting entered, they were being entered as like the 3rd player or the 4th player or just something kind of random. And as such, while we had data on leaders, which was still kind of useful, but necessarily the most accurate, data on which positions were the best was basically simply unusable. So, what is my opinion on the situation? Is Hidden Picks fit for use anymore? I think still, generally speaking, I think Hidden Picks is still solid. While I don't think it's quite as tailored to the issues that are present in Rise of X and trying to address those, I still think as a general idea, you know, removing some of the leaders of a pool out of random and letting people pick in secret backwards, I think is going to be a fairly solid basis for kind of any kind of competitive setup for majority of games, you know, introducing a degree of unpredictability, but also still a degree of strategy in who you're choosing and thinking who could be chosen ahead of you. It's still definitely something to think about, but it's not going to be quite as precise as some people might like. The other question, of course, is being in position 2 or position 3 better than being in position 1 and position 4? Well, we don't have any particular hard data to back it. I think the odds are that it probably is the case, and this has been exacerbated a lot regarding, you know, how the game plays now. And not in these Euro-style games, especially, you know, when you've got, instead of shipping, that needs 2 visits to fold space, if you're the first person that can get there straight away, and you can dominate that, if player 1 decides to do something else, you can get shipping, that can be a massive advantage, and player 1 needs a ton of justification to let you get that. And of course, especially at the moment, is that, well, if player 1 blocks fold space, well, now player 2 just goes smuggling twice, and if they can find extra coin from wherever, however they achieve that, then they can just get Swordmaster way before everyone else, and again, the same issues start forming. So, I think it's fairly probable that player 2 has an advantage over the rest of the board in that respect, and player 3 can definitely adopt some of that as well. But I think there is also a third question that needs to be asked, and that is there that strong a desire to actually change the draft system that we use? Is hidden picks viewed as being particularly unfair and not fit for purpose? I think on that basis, I've got to say I don't agree. I think just for generally sitting down and playing the game, which I think ultimately a large portion of the player base, generally speaking, are, they're not getting ultra competitive and hyper into that sort of thing. They want to play something a bit more laid back, a little more balanced. And while hidden picks is definitely not as simple as just pick whoever you want, that in itself just seems to be kind of chaotic and not really fair. And I think as, with what Aussie devised, still I think largely fits the bill, although, again, the perception is that player 4 is still a bit of a disadvantage to everyone else, and it seems possible that's the case, but we don't really know at the moment. So the issue you've got now is that if you make any changes to the drafting system, there's no hard evidence to suggest that it's actually necessary. Just because you perceive player 4 to be in a weaker position doesn't necessarily mean that it is in a weaker position. One of the amazing things that came out of the Imperium Cup before the Golden Path Internationals came out is that we collect information regarding every single game got played in the Imperium Cup to kind of see where the situation of the game and make a more informed decision on how to change the reverse leader draft. Now, the thought is that player 2 was crushing games and player 4 was basically losing almost everything. And it turned out that player 4 was still winning about 21% of matches, which was a lot higher than a lot of people were expecting. Player 2 was about like 28%, and player 1 and player 3 were pretty much dead even around 25% or so, which was a lot more even than we were expecting. Again, one of the biggest sample size, it was about 100 games or so. But it still seemed a good place to kind of start. And while it showed that while changes probably were required, they didn't need to be anywhere near as extreme as was first figured. So I definitely think there's a twofold issue that needs to be overcome. First of all, there's got to be a desire to want to change, like kind of fairly overwhelmingly. And there also needs to be a tangible reason in order to do so. I'm not quite sure we're there yet. I think Hidden Picks is still fairly decent. There's been some other suggestions thrown out as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. About like returning to an open drafting system, which I don't 100% hate the idea of just having an open draft, but the issue is that if position 2 and position 3 are viewed as stronger than the other two, it doesn't matter what kind of drafting system, if you're only picking leaders, that's not going to solve these issues. And that, of course, leads me to the part I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for me to talk about, and that is snake drafts. Snake drafts are somewhat viewed as kind of the creme de la creme of competitive drafting, and is something that has been mooted as something potentially to introduce into Dune Imperium, especially now that the ranked stuff is currently going on, and maybe for the hyper-competitive situations that those create, maybe it's a more fitting system to use for selection of your bits and pieces. For those of you who don't know what a snake draft is, it's actually pretty simple, but at the same time kind of complicated, and I'll explain how it goes. So again, in our normal drafting of leaders, you have your 14 leaders or 8 leaders, however many you have, and you pick your leaders. But of course, when you select your script to obviously sit down, there's this shuffle players button, and what this does is it just randomly decides where you're going to sit. This was introduced to stop certain people trying to sit on the left or right of particular other place for reasons, just get around that, not a situation you need to get into. What snake drafting would do is not only are you picking your leaders, you also pick where you sit on the table. Anything that can be chosen has to be chosen. And the idea is basically you take 4 players, red, 4 players, you decide in whatever order they're going to go to. So let's say you've got player A, you've got player B, player C, and player D. You decide randomly what order these 4 are going to choose. And what you end up doing is you go to player A at first, and you say, all right then, you can choose what leader you want, or you can choose where you sit on the table. You have to choose one of them, but you can't choose both. And the idea being is that while player A decides if they're going to sit at a particular spot on the table or take a particular leader, once all 4 players have chosen one of those things, you then go back in reverse order so players choose the other thing they haven't already done. So player A chooses then B, then C, then D, but then player D chooses their second thing. Whatever they didn't choose the first time, they choose what's left. Then C does it, then B does it, and then A does it. And the idea being that if something is seen to be very strong, an idea, so let's say player A chooses to go to seat position 2, well then, once it comes to here, they've got to wait all the rest of the draft before they can pick their leader. And the idea being, they'll pick a good seat position, but player D and C and B are going to pick the good leaders, and that's going to leave A to have to deal with a good seat position, but a not-so-strong leader. That's how a snake draft works, in theory. It also means that player D, for example, while they might get their last pick of what they're going to have the first time round, they make both choices back to back. So they get to pick their leader and their seat position at the same time. So they can see what A, B, and C have done and react accordingly. So you've got a situation where D kind of gets kind of like, kind of middling picks of both of them. They kind of pick from a kind of okay seat position and okay sort of leader. Whereas player A gets like a, really, really awesome first pick. And then they've got to pick whatever's been given to them for whatever they didn't choose. And that kind of does itself balancing. So snake drafting basically turns the very beginning of the stage, where you've even sat down and drawn any cards in your deck, you're already playing a game with the other players on the table as to what you're going to be doing and where you're going to be doing it from. This can create some interesting byplay. One of the main other games that I've played that has like a very intensive drafting system like this was Twilight Imperium 4, and the multi-draft it's known as, which is basically a snake draft, but it's actually a bit more because there's 3 things you pick in Twilight Imperium. You pick the faction you're going to play as, you choose your position on the table, and you choose your slice, which is basically what portion of the map you're going to select for your own thing. So it goes from 1 to 6, back to 1, then back to 6 again. Very extensive. So you're picking kind of, you're maneuvering, trying to pick leaders to try and put with certain sections of the map that suits them, and then trying to also kind of be careful who your neighbors are going to be, who you're going to be in good relations with, who you think you're going to be in immediate combat, and it's such as this big competition already. And you look at some of the competitions with Space Cats, Peace Turtles, and the drafting section is like really, really serious. And there's even a more expanded draft section because there's 25 different factions. Now you're at a situation with that where you basically draft all those factions into 4 separate pools of factions, and then one of those gets chosen randomly to use the multi-draft. So you've got a draft on top of another big draft before you even sit down and take any actions on the game board. Very intensive, and sometimes can take a long old time. Now, Dune Imperium is nowhere near as complicated as a game like Twilight Imperium 4, the opera of board gaming. Games that can take 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, even longer sometimes. We're far from that. Completely different style of game. But it is interesting how, looking at one can kind of bleed into other and give you an insight of what I think might start happening. So, can snake drafting work? It definitely can, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it can't work. But my concern is that I don't think it's going to be anywhere as effective as how people might think. Because there's so many different things to pick from in Twilight Imperium 4, for example, it does create a very interesting byplay of what you prioritize. There's loads of things, and when you make a choice, you've got to wait for a lot of stuff to happen before you get a second one. So there's some real significant weight on what you're going to choose. My problem with the snake draft is that I think if snake draft comes out, the first thing that's going to happen for the majority of people when they get snake draft is let's say you get picked first up and you get first choice. Well, what are you going to do? Well, it seems fairly likely that what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and pick second position. Let's take this as an advantage, as an example here, because again, as I talk about getting the smuggling twice for Swordmaster, getting the foul space twice for Interstellar Shipping, both seem incredibly strong, and there's nothing anyone can do about that because you just get to the same place before anyone else. Seems really good. Now, while I might not have a very strong lead, I might have to deal with like an Ariana maybe, or maybe like a Paul. No, I don't mind Paul. A laser, that sort of thing. Some of these that are viewed as not necessarily being quite as strong in Immortality. I think there's a little bit of misconception in regards to sort of the strength of who you're playing as. while obviously who you choose as a leader is going to make a difference. Let's say, like, if I do end up playing as, say, what's a good example here? Like Ariana, for example, would be, I think, a pretty good example. Difficult leader to get a million of. I think her passive's not very good. She's got a very strong ring, though. Don't get me wrong. The problem is that who you're playing as doesn't make, I think, the biggest difference in the world in drafting, because while obviously you've got your deck, you've got your leader, you're still starting with the same 10 cards. This doesn't change. It's not like other games where, say, you pick a particular leader and you get a particular starting beginning deck. It's the same for everyone. And not only is this the same for everyone, this is the same for everyone. And this is where I think the problem is going to start forming here. I think we are going to start seeing happening. Because let's take an example. Let's say like Dissecting Kit, for example. Very, very strong card. Now, just because I'm playing as Ariana, is Dissecting Kit any less effective than if I'm playing as Tessia Vernius? Or if I'm playing as the Beast? Does me playing as Ariana make this any weaker? I don't really think so. If I'm playing, and this is a good example. Let's say I get hold of Firm Grip, for example. Very, very strong card, you know, allowing you to fight alliances, you know, jump all sorts of queues. If I get this as Ariana, is this any less effective for me than it is for Tessia? Obviously, it's great for Tessia, of course. But is this bad in Ariana's hands? Of course it's not. It's a really, really strong card. And that's the thing. There aren't that many cards, I don't think, in the entire Imperium, in the entire deck here, the Imperium Road, that are, like, for some players really good and for some players really bad. You know, if a card's got a wild bump, that's really good. If a card allows you to discard to get faction, that's really good, you know. Benny Taxa Research, oh, Variant, oh, that's absolutely terrible. No, of course not. It's also strong. And so what I think is going to happen is, while I think player 2 is going to have weaker leaders, I think because they're still picking the same set of cards, I think this makes as much of a difference, if not more of a difference, how your game goes, as who your leader is. And definitely there's a perception that where you're sitting is influencing how, you know, your chances in the game. I don't think sitting in position 2 with a not amazing leader is going to make as much a difference there. If you're playing, if you've got a Tessia in 4th position and Ariana in 2nd position, like, is player 4, they think, oh gosh, we've got to stop player 4. Player 4's got a massive advantage. No, you still think player 2 is really strong. And while this perception might be incorrect, and I accept that, that's how things I think are going to begin. So then the question is, how do you stop perception becoming reality? If there is a concern that people are just going to pick 2nd position all the time, at what point can you tamper with the draft in order to, if someone picks 2nd position, then they're going to get penalized enough so that they might consider picking something else? You know, how do you get the first person in a competitive game to not sit here when the idea is that it's so strong for so many reasons? How do you get them to not play there? Well, that's the issue. And I don't know what the answer to that is. Now, if you're playing a system like this, you cannot play with all 14 leaders. What you're probably going to have to do is put them all into the bag, like so. And you're going to have to probably bring out some out of leaders. I don't know how many, but let's say that you take out, I don't know, let's say 6 leaders. Let's do a random draft here, for example. Let's take 6 leaders here. You know, not even any particularly strong leaders. So let's say I go and sit in seat 2. And then the other players take the other seat, and they take all the other leaders. Let's say you get, like, Lido there. You get, like, Ilban here. And you get, like, Yuno there, for example. All these be decent picks. All, you know, all fairly happy in that. So it comes back to me, and I'm in 2nd position. Well, what is I got left from? Am I that disappointed who I'm getting left with? I mean, Memnon obviously is still not very good, but at least in that position, I'm happy with that. I can easily get hold of the coin I need to threaten Swordmaster, so Ilban's in the same position. Does he go full space? Does he go smuggling? And here I get Hunter in 2nd position. Like, I'm just getting to shipping almost every single time. I can find intrigues that get me to shipping for anyone else. I can get bribery. I can get finesse. I can get so many intrigues that let me get hold of shipping in the first place, regardless of if player 1 decides to block it up. I'm probably still going to get there anyway, so I'm not even that unhappy with the situation. And even if I take a more extreme example, this is one I've legitimately made up, not left it a random chance. So let's say that we go for 6 leaders and we get hold of this leader set. Well, let's say I go for position 2 again. And everyone else picks their seats and the leaders. So let's say you get like Tesia there, you get like Beast in fourth, Ilban in third, and I've got to be left picking between these three leaders. Am I even that unhappy about that? I mean, it's not ideal, but I'm still not totally unhappy. Memnon in second position is not the worst. That extra spice is going to be decent bits and pieces. I can obviously get hold of money to get hold of High Council as well. Vernius has some niche uses and can definitely be used to fight for some combats later on. And Ariana as well, that war is still really valuable. It means that even if like I'm chasing for fold space, or specifically if I get still given smuggling, I can still use my ring somewhere for the war. I can still challenge for Great Flat to get me to conspire, to get hold of spice, so I can buy maybe a tech, memo quarters, shuttle fleet, that sort of thing. I'm still not that entirely unhappy. So this is the issue I think you're going to have. At what point do you adjust this, you know? Let's say that we take out some of these leaders. So let's say we do the same snake drafting, 100% the same, but instead of picking 6 leaders out, let's just pick 4. I've shuffled this again. So let's just do it clear. So let's say that we go for 4 leaders only, the absolute minimum we can have, and in theory, the biggest de-incentive we can possibly give to someone not just picking second place first. Well, let's pull out 4 leaders. Let's see, we got Yuna, we got Ekaz, we got Vernius, and we've got the Baron. So pretty clear, you know, you got some 3 decent leaders and you got one that seems to be worse than the others, you know, and okay, that's going to be an issue. So if I pick second position, I can be fairly confident that by the time it all goes down and leaders are picked everywhere, that I'm going to be playing as Romba Vernius. Now, I'm not a very strong Vernius player myself, but I know some people that definitely do fancy themselves of that. Do I still think I've got a decent shot in this game? I think I've definitely got chances. Again, because the power of just hitting a space first, I just think is so good in a style of game like this where there are so few actions. Being able to get those unique accesses so early is really good. And again, the problem is, like, you know, if I go fold space twice and get hold of insider shipping, you know, obviously you got Baron here, can master it to get hold of one of those fold space bumps, but when's he gonna get his second bump? You know, like if I'm fighting for instead shipping access, does that mean blue's just gonna let yellow's just gonna let blue have fold space as a counter? Not necessarily. They're gonna do their own things. You know, maybe they've got a way to get the fold space as well. You know, and try and cut us off. There's all sorts of things that can happen here. And if we take another situation, the other side of the coin, of course, where let's say, all right, then still pick second position, but our leader pool this time is let's say something like this. Am I really that unhappy with whoever I get left with? I don't care. I'd say they're all good here. So, you know, equally with the last one, it's like, well, I've got a leader who feels a little bit weaker than the other ones, but I'm compensated by position. Here, I don't care. I just tweak my game plan. If I get Ilban or Lido or Beast, I threaten Swordmaster and shipping immediately. If I get Hundro, I can probably ship anyways. I can just go Wealth, and then use my smuggling bump and a ring bump in order just to go up and down and cash in and just get Swordmaster anyways. And you see the same problem resumes itself. And you see, in this situation, like, the snake draft hasn't really worked. And this with the least leaders possible. We can't make it in this. We can't give any bigger de-incentive. So you're going to have some games where a player might feel, oh, I'll take second position, but I'm left with an iffy leader, to games like this where, like, where's the disadvantage to going second place? That's not ideal. Now, to make it clear, this is not me saying that a snake draft can't work. Far from it. I definitely think it can work, but it's not as simple as just saying, hey, let's do a snake draft. There's a lot of nuance to doing them and doing them well and correctly. And you can see, you know, I'm giving you examples of where the problems lie. Now, what's the correct solution? Do we do 4 leaders? Do we do 5, 6, 8? I have no idea. The problem is of course, the less leaders you have, the more just general randomness you're going to have in the snake draft. And of course, if the point of having a snake draft is it to be ultra competitive, well, the whole idea of being ultra competitive is that there is no randomness and that it's all about player choice, skills, and decisions. So if you just totally restrict the whole leaders, then it's kind of random what you're going to get. And, you know, if you get a situation where all the leaders are kind of viewed as not great, then you've still got the same position. The only time that snake draft seems to work is when second position specifically has a worse lead than everyone else. And the odds of that happening are just not that likely. And I return to the other point I made earlier. Do I want to sit down to a game of Dune Imperium every time knowing that I'm going to have to deal with this little bit of cat and mouse to and fro before I even get to actually play the game that I've sat down in the first place to do? Being honest, not particularly. You know, one of the things I love about hidden picks is that while there's an edge of kind of like thinking about what you're going to pick and why you're picking about them, it's not mandatory. It doesn't compel you to think about it. You know, I still see people all the time with hidden picks. They'll literally see these come out and just pick someone almost immediately. You know, even in like, you know, position 3 to even position 1, not remotely thinking about what anyone's done. Just pick, oh, I like that leader. Just have them and just rocking and rolling. And I like that. It means that there's a license available to players, but they don't feel to have to do it. If you're getting involved in snake jobs, you feel like you have to get kind of into the weeds a little bit and you're thinking about it. So, and I just, in a more general sense, I don't think that's something that people want to do, you know, and I just don't think that's attractive. Now, you might say, well, let's just have a snake draft for the ranked games. Then the other general games just play with hidden picks. Yeah, you could definitely do that, but then you're creating that us versus them. You're going to have people that prefer the snake draft just playing snake draft games, people that prefer playing hidden picks just playing hidden pick games. And then the problem is then gradually those two are going to start slowly shifting away from each other, you know, and that's not good. This is how you get community splits and divisions, and people think that something's better than the other, which is not something we've had too much of at the moment, and is definitely something I'd want to encourage. So, while I think it can work, there are a lot of concerns that I have over implementing it. And this is why I'm kind of making this video. I think the base of it makes sense, but I'm not sure the appetite is there overall. And even if it is, my concern is people start getting of it, and a lot of people are just like, you know, this is kind of silly. Can we just go back to what it was? It was still fairly casual, just relaxing, getting into the game. We're not going to deal with all this sort of stuff, you know, and against different approaches. Some people will play games a lot more kind of seriously and competitively than others. This is why ranked exists, you know, because some players want to, like, challenge themselves in these really kind of those more higher pressure situations. But there are other players that just don't really care. One of the things that I really enjoy doing with like my LFG streams is that I just play random games with people that I don't know. And I really enjoy it. It's nice to be able to play with people that I don't know at all. Obviously, there's times of playing like more regulars, people that I know obviously has its interest, definitely. I'm not going to even suggest that isn't the case. You know, and maybe I'm not the fairest arbiter of the situation, but like on a personal level, I'm not really that fussed about the rank thing. I mean, it's cool as it exists, and I think for people that are interested in, definitely they should delve into it. But am I like, oh, I've got to make sure I play ranked games? No, I'm here for trying to enjoy it and trying to do different things and experimenting. You know, that's just what I value more. So for me, the appeal of it is not as strong as it would be for some others. I think the one other thing that currently works against doing a snake draft as well is that is a huge fundamental change of drafting system from what we had previously. One of the things that really helped hidden picks kind of grow gradually on the back door, and then I was able to introduce it into the Golden Path International, is that it wasn't that big a difference from what had come before with the reverse leader picks. It was still reverse leader picking, except it was done in secret and with some of these random moves. That was it. Really nice and simple. People that played the reverse draft system could very easily grasp and immediately get how the hidden picks worked. Or like, oh, okay, so I pick from less leaders and you can't pick. Okay, straightforward. You just get straight into the game. You know, a snake draft is a much more fundamental change in how people approach the game, and it's creating a different focus on how to kind of think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And while definitely you could argue that that is going to probably make people better players in the long run, and you could definitely argue that, I don't think that's necessarily the goal. The target I think we should be addressing is trying to get as many people as possible giving this game a spin, trying it, enjoying it, getting involved in our community, and getting around a draft system that seems to have a degree of kind of like, you know, something more rigid and standard and is being implemented for an obvious reason, but isn't so complicated that it's in itself a turn off from just playing the game generally speaking. And that would be what I would really hate to see. And that is my concern with snake drafting, is while it might obviously solve particular issues, I think that it creates other ones that I don't think are worth it. Another suggestion that's been thrown as well, I'll quickly mention this as well, is saying that we should pick in a specific order. So I've seen people suggesting, well, rather than picking 4, 3, 2, 1, why don't we just pick 4, 1, 3, 2 and do it this way? Okay, well, we could. But the question is, why are we picking that way? And you'd say, well, because player 2 is the best position and player 3 seems to be the second best position, so we're getting to pick last. Okay. So, two questions. First of all, I might understand that, and you might understand that. But if I get someone to play a game of Dune Imperium for like one of their first times ever, and they come to play TTS, and then there's just like this random, like, oh, player 4 is first, and then it's player 1, and that just looks really bizarre and weird on paper, and we've got to explain to them why we're doing it, they'll be like, what? Why bother with that? You know, why just pick something else? They're not so interested. They're not interested in that so much. They're just playing the game and enjoying it. The other issue you've got is, okay, well, if we pick 4-1-3-2 as a way to kind of self-balance the game, well, what happens if we do that and then suddenly it turns out that player 1, for example, has suddenly got an advantage on all the other tables? Then we've got to change the draft system again, right? Then we've got to go 4-3-2-1 again. What if player 4 then starts urging up in front? Do we change it again? Do we then get player 4 to pick last again? Do we go 1-3-2-4? And you just start chasing this tail. These are all hypotheticals. I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, but you can see the issue. You know, you start kind of like you're constantly twisting and turning the pick order to adjust that. And again, snake drafts are designed so that they shift with the meta, and I accept that they achieve that. But I just don't think a lot of people just playing the game for enjoying it with their friends and playing online with people and meeting people. I don't honestly believe that many of them want to go through snake draft game after game after game. And if you start having half the games in one system, half the other, that is a recipe for issues. And that is the last thing I'd want to happen. I'm going on a little bit, admittedly, and I will wrap this up here. I'm getting a little bit off on tangents and such, but I hope you guys understand my thoughts on it. You know, and something is definitely I think we should experiment with. And maybe for some smaller competitions, you know, I don't see a reason not to maybe explore looking to get this involved maybe somehow. But I'm not sure and convinced at all that it is right to say we're going to implement this just across the board for every single game. I'm going to be brutally honest here. If every single game was a snake draft, I would be less interested in playing Dune Imperium. That's just my opinion. I would feel less incentivized to be on TTS like, oh, let's play some Dune Imperium, because I know I've got to spend 5-6 minutes before every single game kind of doing this dance around and thinking what people are going to pick and that. I don't play Dune Imperium with that. Dune Imperium is great because it has little bits of different game modes. There's a bit of Euro, a bit of deck building, a bit of PvP, but it's over and done in 90 minutes. You know, sometimes even less than that. And I don't think it's attractive at all trying to extending that artificially because of a leader system that we designed, which ultimately is pretty complicated compared to what the alternatives are. So, you know, I hope I've made my thoughts fairly clear and concise enough. You know, and you understand that I think there is a lot more to consider with snake draft than saying, let's just do one. There's a lot of nuance and complexity to it. Even with a game where there's such few things to decide here, in a way, I think that makes it more difficult because there's less things to have in the pot to balance itself when one of them seems so much better than all the rest. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video, so I do thank you very much for your company. I'm definitely obviously very interested to hear your thoughts on everything I've addressed. I'm sure there are going to be things that I've said that some people just fundamentally do not agree with, and that's totally fine. And I think ultimately there is not going to be a general consensus on whether this should be done or not. You know, and I'm sure there'll be some people who will view us and said, you know what, you bring up some valid points. Should be about certain things a bit more, and there'll be some people who will think, Shadow, you're just blowing gas out here, and you're missing the whole main point of it. And both points are totally valid. I've got no issues with that, but I think that we should tread with a lot of caution here with what we're doing, and recognize that while hidden picks might not be perfect, I don't think anything is perfect unless it starts getting very complicated. And if it starts getting very complicated, it just becomes a put off, and people are just not going to do it in the first place. And then what was the whole point? And that's the concern. Very much for listening, everyone. I will be around, hopefully, on Sunday with one more stream on the LFG streets here on Hidden Assets. And that'll be basically the last thing that I do before my move the middle of next week. So hopefully I'll see some of you guys then. If not, then I'll see you in the new premises where I'll be sitting down and we will be taking a look at the 2023 Imperium Cup. Coming pretty soon. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you soon.